So today I'm going to talk to you about harnessing the hybrid classroom using Indigenous teaching praxis to increase student engagement. So the University of Alberta respectfully acknowledges that we're located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. And what I'd like you to do is maybe just take a minute to reflect on the lens in which you're situated. So what I'd like to do is we're going to go to www.menti.com and use this code 80568180. And I'd just like you to answer and allow you to answer all 4 questions if you like. So what are your expectations for today's session? Are you looking forward to learning a lot? You want to discuss this subject? You just want to have fun? And maybe you want to learn some new strategies. So people are looking to learn a lot, obviously. That's the highest one, wanting to discuss the subject. Some folks just want to have fun and learning new strategies. It's awesome. This helps me, and I like to do this with my students as well, so that I understand what their needs are for class. What is it that they need on that particular day? And it could vary from day to day. You could do this on Poll Everywhere with the stoplight function. So you could, Graham's done that before and showed us. And all of these things just give us a little bit of a glimpse into what's happening with our students in that particular moment. And those questions can obviously change. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts around that. What we're going to do is engage with Indigenous worldviews within the context of teaching praxis. We're going to identify wise practices for engaging students through decolonial methods. And we're going to reflect on our own teaching ethos and its impact on the hybrid HyFlex classroom. And so Tommy talked a little bit about teaching ethos. And so I'd like you to sort of, as we go through this, think about that. Think about what your own teaching philosophy is. What is your teaching ethos? What is your classroom ethos? And I'll share mine with you as we go through this presentation. So this quote is from Michelle Tanaka, and she is a teacher in the K through 12 system, as well as in university on Vancouver Island. And so she has a book called Learning and Teaching Together, Weaving Indigenous Ways of Knowing into Education. And I love this book. This has been so helpful to me in my own journey, and I encourage you to get it if you can. It's on Amazon. So learning is not only intellectual, but also physical, emotional, and spiritual. Learning is cross-disciplinary, cross-cultural, cyclical, and circular. Each learner creates a unique sense of what wholeness means as learning extends from the inside rather than being motivated solely by external forces. So thinking about why might students come to class, what might keep them engaged in class, what might keep them coming to class. So, you know, we were all students, and some things resonated more with us than others, and it was really easy to disengage if things weren't interesting enough, or we felt like it was slow, or we felt like it just the content didn't speak to us, right? So how do we create opportunities for students to really engage with their whole selves in the curriculum? And so those are some of the things we'll talk about here today. So it was really interesting to me and sort of serendipitous yesterday when Stephen Brookfield talked about doing an I am from poem with students. And I have to give props to my really good friend, Dr. Alison Sivak, who's in the room here today, who is in libraries. And she taught a group of us that were working together in a prison education course that we teach called Walls to Bridges at the Edmonton Institute for Women, she taught us how to do this I am from poem. So Allison, thank you so much. The kudos go to you. But what I'd like us to do is create our own I am from poem. And we're actually going to put this in Jamboard, which I'll get to in a second. I also want to give a shout out to both Krista and Anita, my colleagues, who did this of their own free will yesterday for their sessions as well. They shared their own I am from poems, which were so beautiful and lovely. And I'm glad that there was some momentum for this activity. So I'm going to share them on with you, and I'll give you some instructions on how to write your own. And I really love doing this with students. I feel like this is one of those activities that I learned from someone else, and I was able to bring that into my own practice. So I am from cabbage rolls, homemade baked bread, and lemon meringue pie. Bon Jovi posters and LPs, which is sort of dating me a little bit. I am from We Are Rich in Love, Baby, which is what my dad always used to say when I said, why aren't we rich? And Bye Bye Miss American Pie, which was my grandpa's very favorite song. And I am from pit houses and cherry blossom trees. So traditionally, my family in Oregon, we had pit houses, which were structures built. They would dig a huge hole in the ground, and that would become sort of the food storage area. And it was always covered with wood, so it almost looked like a rooftop over top of the hole. And sometimes this would be winter dwellings as well, because of course, in the ground, it's a little bit warmer, right? So I'm going to show you the instructions. So remember this, to connect student experience to the content is a tenet of Indigenous pedagogy, right? So it's these connections that we're making with the content, with the curriculum, with what we're learning, and also what we're learning about our classroom community. So it's always nice to learn something about our student colleagues and also about our instructor, because it helps us feel like we are a part of a group rather than sort of on the fringes and not really a participant. So what I'd like you to do is I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to do some writing on your own. And so what I'd like you to do is answer these 5 questions. So something that you remember eating at home when you were a child, something that you had on your bedroom wall as a teenager, a saying that an adult would say to you, a song that played in your childhood home, and a memory that you have. And if you can't get through all of these, don't worry. And you can also pick and choose which ones you'd like to answer. But you should start your sentences with I am from. And then we'll go over to the Jamboard, which I'll show you in just a second. But I want to give you an opportunity to do some writing on your own and some thinking on your own. So before you put your whole poem on there, what I would like you to do is choose the one stanza that you like the most from your poem. And we're going to sort of make a collective group poem with all of your Post-its. So on the left-hand side, if you're not familiar with Jamboard, most of you probably are, you can choose text, you can choose a sticky note. I'm going to suggest that you choose a sticky note to write your stanza on. So remember to start it with I am from. So go ahead. Someone from Hotel California, obviously the song, Pretty Woman and Dancing Queen, Turn Your Frown Upside Down, Saskatchewan Summers, Spent in the Lake, from Fly Low and Go Slow, Catching Crayfish in the Grand River, Don't Buy the Liverwurst, Sitting in a Hilly Vacant Lot, Staring at the Plants and Imagining the Tiny People that Lived Among Them, Great Imaginations, right? From Deo, Banana Boat Song. I'm from 4:58 a.m., November 25th, 1998. I love these. And I'm not going to erase this board ever. I'll keep it, and you can always come back to this. And what I like to do with this is when I'm doing this with students, I put the link on eClass so that they always know who their student colleagues are. The other thing that I do with students through synchronous, asynchronous learning, remote learning, is I actually create a Google Drive, and the students upload a 1 to 2 minute introduction video. And all students can access that to look and see their student colleagues, because it's really hard, right? We don't get to see each other and collaborate, but then they get to know each other and I get to know them too. So of course I have questions that I ask that they answer, that they can share what they want with the class. And I like those tools to get to know each other, to create our community. And so for me, it's really important that we're creating a community that is reciprocal, that is responsible, that is built on relationships, and that we're acting as professionals with each other, right? That we're taking the time to respect one another and to act from a place of kindness. And so I walk students through this at the beginning of the semester. Our whole first class is about that, and they come having read some Indigenous readings about this, so they have a frame of reference. And I actually find that the class goes a little bit better. It's a more respectful, and I try. So what does it mean to be a non-competitive environment with each other? What if we're there to help each other learn more and do better, right? So those are the sorts of introductory conversations that I have with students. So thank you so much again for doing that. I'd just like you to have a chance to either share verbally. Mike will make sure that you can unmute, or you could add into the chat. I hope, Mike, we have that function. Did you enjoy creating your poem? You can answer any one of these questions. Did this activity create a community? Did you learn more about your colleagues? And would this be an effective engagement tool to use in your work or your teaching practice? Is this something you could see bring forward into your own toolkit? So you can put in the chat if you want. If you don't, that's fine too. I know it's end of the day and we're all feeling a little tired. Someone enjoyed it more than they thought they would. Real warmth, I feel, when writing mine and reading others' poems. Definitely something I'll integrate into my teaching. Yes, the humanizing that Tommy was talking about. And you can have students go into breakout groups to talk about their I am from poems. There's many different ways that you could use this in your classroom teaching as a part of your teaching philosophy or ethos. Yeah, we are from instead of the I am from. I love that. I love that. You can answer all, you could work with the students to decide on which questions you'd ask. So you could do that as well. And then it would be truly collaborative. Yeah, reading other stanzas also sparked other memories. Yes, absolutely. I know when I read some of those things, especially the one about thinking of the other people that might live amongst like our other than human kin that might live in and amongst the gardens or the plants, that really resonated with me too. So I love this quote, and I know I've shared it before in some of my sessions, and it's also in the territorial acknowledgement video, and I do love it, by Robin Wall Kimmerer. So if you've heard it before, feel free to, not listen as closely, but I do love this because I think it is such a really great message. So if one tree fruits, they all fruit. There are no soloists. Not one tree in a grove, but the whole grove. Not one grove in the forest, but every grove, all across the country and all across the state. The trees act not as individuals, but somehow as a collective. Exactly how they do this, we don't yet know. But what we see is the power of unity. What happens to one happens to all of us. We starve together or feast together. All flourishing is mutual. So what I love about this quote is, as Indigenous people, we are looking at the collective, right? It's not about the individual. It's about how are we all flourishing together. If one person isn't flourishing, that's a problem. There's something that needs to be done. So I think about this in our classroom. How can we help students to help each other? What does that look like? What might those rules of engagement be? What might you set up at the beginning of the semester with students to help them think about the collective rather than the individual, because it's really easy to slip into, oh my gosh, I got a B on this assignment and I should have gotten an A, and so got an A, right? I think this mindset is cultivated when we're young. And I know this from my own experience in school, in the K through 12 system, where everybody is, well, what did you get on the test? Well, this is what I got, right? So this competition starts really young. And I think we need to sort of try and mitigate that and really talk about that collective genesis. And I think a lot of really great experiences for students come out of that collectivity, right? Feeling a part of the group. So Indigenous pedagogies are personal and holistic. They're experiential. They're rooted in place-based learning. They're intergenerational, they're collaborative, and they're relational. So these are coming, I pulled these from Weaving Indigenous Ways of Knowing in Classrooms and Schools, and the Pulling Together Guide for Teachers and Educators. Both of those are open education learning resources, so feel free. I have shared these slides on our site. So I think there's a Google folder that has everyone's presentations in there, so you can feel free to go to those links. It's really important to feel that connection to the curriculum. And the ways that we can do that are through our assignments, right? Through those activities in the classroom, whether that be synchronous or asynchronous, or whether they be face-to-face, right? And I know that that's sort of up in the air for some of us for this fall. And, we might be doing a high flex style class where some of it's face-to-face and some of it's online, right? And so you should be able to adapt all of these different pedagogies, whether you're face-to-face or online. So something I did in my class, and I cannot take credit for this. I'm really good at learning from other people. I love researching new and interesting ways and unique ways to engage students. And something I saw at the beginning of the pandemic on a Facebook site for teachers to go, it's a Facebook group, and there's lots of teachers in there sharing their experiences. And so one such experience was about, how do I create online forums or discussion boards for students where I don't actually have to be involved? How do I have this mimic the hallway, right? So I think of teaching, and after class, the students are gathering together, some of them, whether it be in the classroom still or out in the hallway, to talk about what they've learned, to ask questions of each other. Jennifer said this, but I didn't quite understand it, right? So one of the solutions to this was to create the hallway conversations online. So what I've done through eClass is I've created a forum called the Hallway Forum. And I don't monitor this, although I want to say, and I know Graham's questioned me on this in a really good way, about if I'm saying I'm not monitoring it, then I shouldn't be monitoring it. But I'm also concerned about the forum being a safer place, right? So how do we create this space where students are safe to share, to talk amongst each other? So I'm just looking for things that might be red flags for me that I need to address. And I'm not really reading what they're saying. But what I saw happen the first time I did this, which was fall 2020, the students were sharing what they saw in the news, because at that time there was lots of fishing disputes going on in Mi'kma'ki. And so the students were talking about, they're like, I don't understand what's going on. And then another student say, well, have you read this article? Do you know about this? Do you know about this history? So the students were helping each other to learn. They were also finding ways to be like, we're working on a group project together and I need a teammate, right? Or Jennifer said this was due, tomorrow. Does anybody have any more details, right? So the students were actually collaborating on their own and recreating this hallway for themselves, which was fantastic to see. And if you want to have support on how to create this, I'm happy to help you do that. I'm happy to show you what my space looks like. So something else that I love, and I love talking about this, are the traditional teachings. And so how can we incorporate Indigenous traditional teachings into our everyday teaching practice and into our course design, right? So being very thoughtful about how we introduce these concepts and what they might look like in our courses. So the 7 grandfather teachings, I've also heard, is the 7 grandmother teachings. So depending on which nation will depend on the teachings. And so these are, the 7 grandfather teachings are from the Anishinaabe. So love, respect, courage, honesty, wisdom, humility, and truth. And so I like to use these as an ethos in my class. So these are the foundational underpinnings of my teaching practice. So some things that I thought about is, how do we pull these in? What might I teach? What might my course and curriculum look like? So connect to character and citizenship education. So being better citizens, creating a better society. So respect, teaching from a place of respect, reciprocity, relationship, and responsibility, which is Wahkohtowin, which is Cree. Responsibility to oneself and the learning community, so reflective practice. So how does this article reading resonate with me and connect to my lived experience? Our classroom ethos, as I've talked about. And then potlatch as pedagogy. So if you're not familiar with what a potlatch is, this is a ceremony that is performed here on the west coast of British Columbia. A potlatch was also banned, right? So through colonial history, those were banned. So the potlatch is really a ceremony of giving, right? There's lots of dancing and celebration and feasting and coming together as a community to celebrate. And there was also giveaways, right? So people gave away gifts. Land was sometimes given away too. And so you'd find a potlatch was really common with weddings, right? So one individual from one nation and another individual from another nation, their families might exchange land, right? So the settler government did not like this, right? Because land ownership is everything. And they didn't want this exchange of land because they couldn't keep track of who had what, right? So all these potlatches were banned. So when we're thinking of potlatches pedagogy, learning emerges from strong relationships, authentic experiences, curiosity, observation, contribution, recognizing and encouraging strengths. So what strengths do I have as a student? How can I build upon those strengths? What do I need to learn to become stronger, right? To become a better learner? What is it that I need to know about me so that I can help myself to learn in the best way possible? And what do I need to ask for? What kind of supports do I need to ask for? Potlatch's pedagogy also honors the power of the mind, history, and story, and aspects of spirituality and protocol. So what do I need to do as a learner? So when Gilman came to our session yesterday to start us off in a good way, I had to do tobacco. I had to have a conversation with him to ask in a good way. I also have to make sure that I'm offering honorarium, right? But what if I did this in my classroom with my students? What if I offered my students tobacco and they offered me tobacco so that we could learn in a good way from one another? What might that reciprocity look like? What might this protocol look like? So decolonization, equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism in education. So of course, most of you know this is, a really big piece of all that I teach and my work at the university. And so I often think about, how do we approach teaching praxis from an Indigenous feminist theory perspective? So that's my perspective. That's the lens that I choose to do my research through and my teaching praxis. So truth telling. So what I love about Indigenous feminism is that it seeks to uncover the connection between colonialism, gender, heteropatriarchy, and heteronormativity. The feminism is not, Indigenous feminism is not about the relationship between Indigenous men and women. It's really about the intersectionality of colonialism and heteropatriarchy, imperialism, all of these things. So as Indigenous people, we're fighting colonialism in the crown, right? We're not fighting each other. And so I think that's, one of the pieces that's important about Indigenous feminisms. This felt theory. So Indigenous women's stories from a lived experience. When students read about other people's experiences or understand, an individual's experience in a career, right? These were, the hiccups I faced. These were the hurdles I faced. These were the really amazing opportunities I had. They start to understand that area, that field a little bit more, right? Sometimes what they think is that it's all going to be fantastic and wonderful, right? But there are challenges everywhere and in everything. And so how are we preparing our students for all of those things, right? How are we being truthful about that? I often think about women not being truthful about childbirth, right? That was a really interesting experience for me, right? But sometimes we don't tell the truth. We say it's beautiful, it was wonderful, it was the most amazing experience of my life, but really there was, some hard times in there. So also this unpacking of the Indigenous settler relationship. What is that truth? How do we unsettle that? How do we tell the truth in all of these environments and places, right? How are we incorporating Indigenous perspectives or the perspectives of Black and people of color, right? Those are really important experiences for students to know about. How can we go from being an ally to an accomplice, right? So the problem with allyship is that sometimes it's performative. Sometimes we're like, yes, that's important, but you know what? I don't have to think about it and interact with it every day of my life. As an Indigenous person, I don't get the opportunity to just walk away. This is my life. This is my everyday, every living minute breathing relationship to the world. And so when you're thinking of being an ally, that's great, but how are you actioning your ideas? How are you working towards a better society? What are you doing, right? So if we're thinking of a verb, right, what are we doing to make a difference? How are we putting our own selves on the line, right? How are we taking risks? So with anti-racism, so these are having these complex conversations about histories and experiences with our students, bringing in folks into our classroom space so that they can talk about those experiences as well. And are your resources from Equity Denied or a diverse authorship? If it's in my class, mostly I have Indigenous authors, right? Indigenous scholars, but I do use some Black scholars. I do use queer scholars as well in my classes. I also use, non-Indigenous settler authorship in my class as well, right? So I try to be really well-rounded. So wisdom, how are we co-constructing learning? And Tommy talked about this in his session as well. Giving students the opportunity to reflect in meaningful ways through art, podcasts, websites, videos, right? They could create their own video. They could create their own Google Classroom, right? So you can do that in Google and use the emojis, and you could create, and they can have links in there. There's a whole myriad of ways that you can do that. Peer leadership opportunities. So what does leadership look like, feel like, taste like, right? So what is that? And having students try this out. Leadership is hard, right? Sometimes we become micromanagers rather than leaders, right? And so if we want our students to become leaders, what sorts of skills and ideologies are we leaving them with? And what kind of opportunities are there for them in our classroom to show leadership? Can you co-construct a list or a model of leadership? Maybe your class comes up with a leadership model. Humility, so our accountability, right? Offering and receiving feedback. If I'm going to provide feedback to my students about their work, then I have to be open to them offering me feedback, whether I I want to hear it or not, right? This is a two-way communication. And so I need to know what I need to know to do better. And so that accountability and being honest and saying, yeah, actually, I didn't do that really well, right? Tommy talks about fabulous failures, right? We've all had them, right? And being able to say, I was actually wrong, or that wasn't the best way to communicate that, or that wasn't the best lesson. I don't know if anybody's had that experience before. I know I have, and I've thought, oh, I have to be reflective here and think about my teaching practice and how I can be better. So making space for diversity of thought and opinions. So no sage on the stage, no dominant voice in the classroom, limiting the hierarchy. So Stephen Brookfield yesterday talked about circle, right? And having circle, which is something that I do online as well, right? And so asking students to share, to be vulnerable, but also we must be vulnerable in those spaces too. And love. And I know this sounds like, oh, I don't know if I want to show love, right? That might be too much of an emotion, right? And I'm the professor and the instructor, and I need to be professional. But we can still show a professionalism through the act of love, right? Through being kind, through being generous, through being understanding, and recognizing that students are in a place of becoming, right? We're all in that place of becoming. So discussing and practicing professionalism in the classroom. Again, what does that look like? How might we demonstrate that? How might we write in a professional way, in an academic way? And how are we going to do this in a way that always we can see each other's hearts, right? So I talk a lot about that longest journey is from your head to your heart, which Elder Bob Cardinal from Enoch taught me. And so how do we support students to provide feedback, peer feedback, to one another from a place of love, so that people say, oh, well, that person was not so kind. They were actually kind of mean in their feedback. How are we teaching them to give appropriate feedback? And honesty. So being honest in all that you do, your honesty in your research, collaborating with others, your integrity, right? Showing students, the one thing I say to students is, you know what really makes me excited is when I can see that you're using the research properly. I don't need you to know everything, because that's impossible. What I want to see is how you're using the research to formulate your ideas, to support your ideas, right? So really coming from that place of honesty. So I'm not sure how many of you go on Facebook, if you can see Overheard at the U of A. So I like to go on there to see what students are thinking, what they're feeling. And this was something that was on there yesterday. And I thought it really resonated with me, especially about my presentation today. Throughout university, I rarely discussed love of learning or what I learned with other students. We only connected through our shared struggle of bad professors, difficult exams, and useless content. The center of learning turned out to be the center of fear and uncertainty. So I'd like to leave you with that and think about how can we change that dynamic in the classroom? How can we support student learning in a way that helps them to love what they're learning, to love the content in the curriculum, to fall in love with their experience of learning? Because I think about the barriers that are created when we don't love something, when we haven't quite bought into it, right? So how do we make the course, the curriculum, the course design in such a way that allows students, no matter what their lived experiences, feel like they belong in that classroom?